They say every storm begins in the sky, but mine began in their eyes. That night, the thunder wasn't in the clouds. It was in the voices of the people who once called me daughter. The wind that evening carried the smell of something ending. The sky hung low and swollen, the color of bruises, as if even heaven had grown tired of mercy. I remember sitting by the fire, watching its small light fight the shadows crawling across our mud walls, when my mother began coughing again. Deep, broken sounds that shook her whole body like her ribs were trying to escape. I held her hand, whispering her name over and over, as though my voice could pull her back from the edge she was slipping toward. But death has a way of ignoring love, and that night, it didn't even knock before entering our home. When her hand went cold in mine, the world didn't stop. The fire still burned, the rain still whispered against the roof, and the crickets outside kept singing. I sat there in that cruel stillness, unable to understand how the world could keep moving when mine had just ended. It was the midwife who found me, hours later, still holding my mother's body, her eyes wide with fear instead of sorrow. She didn't comfort me. She didn't speak. She only stepped backward, whispering a word that cut deeper than the silence. Witch. By the time I ran to the village square, the word had already spread like a disease. People emerged from their homes clutching charms and crosses, their faces carved with suspicion. Some spat at the ground when I passed. Others crossed themselves. Her mother's soul was clean, one man said, but the child's shadow was too dark. You saw her eyes, didn't you? It didn't matter that I was only 12. It didn't matter that I had spent every day fetching water and selling fruits to buy my mother medicine they never gave. All they saw was the girl whose mother died, screaming, whose house burned brighter than their lamps, whose silence felt heavier than prayers. They gathered under the rain, a sea of faces lit by torches and lightning. The chief stood in the middle, his voice rising above the storm. "Amina," he said, "you brought sickness to this land. You walk with spirits that drink from our wells and sicken our children. You will not curse us again." I begged them to stop. I cried until my throat tore. I told them I loved this village, that I loved my mother, that I would never harm anyone. But my words were swallowed by thunder, and my tears mixed with rain until no one could tell the difference. The same people who once smiled at me now stared like I was something monstrous, something they needed to erase to feel safe. They grabbed me by the arms, their nails digging into my skin, dragging me through the mud as the storm raged louder. I screamed for help, for anyone, but only the wind answered, cruel and cold. My mother's door slammed shut behind me, her body still lying inside, her necklace swinging on the nail above the window, a final goodbye I couldn't reach. The villagers' chants grew louder, echoing off the trees as they pushed me toward the forest's edge. "Send her to the spirits," they shouted. "Let the dark take what it birthed." The smell of wet earth and smoke filled my lungs, choking me as the first flash of lightning tore through the sky. I stumbled, falling face first into the mud, the world spinning between light and darkness. One of them kicked me hard, shouting, "Stay down, witch!" For a heartbeat, I wanted to give up, to let them bury me in their lies. But then I remembered my mother's voice from nights before, soft and tired, but full of love. "You are not cursed, Amina. You are the prayer they fear." Those words burned brighter than any torch. I lifted my head, my hair plastered to my face, rain blinding my eyes but not my will. They tied my hands with rough rope, the fibers slicing into my skin, and forced me to kneel. I looked up one last time, not at the chief, not at the villagers, but at the sky, daring it to strike me if I truly carried evil. Thunder cracked in reply, and for a moment everyone froze. The air hummed with electricity, the torches flickering wildly. The chief hesitated, his voice faltering mid-prayer. Then came the flash, a blinding spear of white light that tore through the sky and struck the tree beside us. The explosion threw them backward, torches scattering, screams swallowed by wind. When the smoke cleared, the rope that bound my wrists hung empty in the rain. They searched until dawn, calling my name not in mercy, but in fear. Some said lightning carried me away. Others swore the spirits had claimed me. By morning, they buried my mother and burned our home to ash. And as the village prayed for protection, the forest swallowed their echoes. But deep within the shadows, I opened my eyes, alive, trembling, and forever changed. They threw me to die in the dark, but the dark kept me alive. The forest they feared became my first witness, and the silence they cursed me with became the only voice that answered back. When I opened my eyes, the world was green and wet and humming. The rain had stopped, but its scent clung to the air, heavy, alive, almost human. My clothes were soaked, my arms scraped with thorns, and my head pulsed with pain so deep it blurred the edges of sound. For a moment, I didn't know where I was, whether this was life or the afterworld their prayers had promised me. Then the pain reminded me. I was not dead. Not yet. The forest around me was unlike anything I had known. The trees towered above like ancient giants, their roots twisting through the earth like veins. Every leaf seemed to whisper secrets in a language I couldn't understand. The air buzzed with insects, alive with unseen eyes watching from the shadows. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out, sending me collapsing against the damp ground. My fingers clawed at the soil, desperate for balance, for meaning, for something that felt human. For 2 days, maybe more, I wandered through that wilderness, bruised, half-mad with hunger, surviving on rainwater caught in leaves and berries I prayed weren't poison. The nights were the worst. Every sound felt like a spirit creeping closer. I would press my back against a tree, whispering my mother's name into the darkness, hoping her spirit could find me. Sometimes I thought I heard her voice, soft, far away, like a lullaby carried by wind. But when I opened my eyes, there was only mist. On the 3rd night, when I was sure I wouldn't see morning, I saw it. A faint orange glow between the trees, flickering like the breath of another world. I stumbled toward it, thorns tearing at my legs, the smell of smoke guiding me through the fog. The closer I came, the warmer the air grew, until I saw her. She sat by a small fire in front of a hut made of reeds and clay, her back straight, her hair a crown of silver under the moonlight. Her eyes lifted as I approached, sharp, knowing, but not afraid. For a heartbeat, I thought she was a spirit. Her presence was too calm for this wild place. Without a word, she rose and came to me. I tried to speak, to ask who she was, but my voice broke into nothing. She touched my forehead gently, her fingers cool and sure, and murmured something in a language I didn't know. The world spun, and then it went black. When I woke, I was lying on a bed of woven grass inside her hut. The roof smelled of herbs and smoke, the air heavy with the scent of ginger and roots. My body was covered with a thin cloth, my wounds cleaned and wrapped. The woman was beside the fire, grinding something in a clay bowl, her movements slow and patient. "You're awake," she said, her voice deep, steady, like a drumbeat beneath the earth. I tried to sit, but she raised her hand. "Rest. The forest took enough from you." I watched her work, mesmerized by the rhythm of her hands. She added water to the bowl, stirred it into a paste, and came to sit beside me. "Eat," she said, pressing a wooden spoon to my lips. The mixture was bitter, but warmth spread through my body almost immediately, chasing away the ache in my bones. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. "Someone the world forgot," she said simply. "And you?" I hesitated. My name felt cursed now, but something in her gaze demanded honesty. "Amina," I said softly. Her eyes flickered, recognition or maybe memory passing through them. "A name that means trust," she murmured. "The world broke yours, didn't it?" I couldn't answer. My throat tightened, tears slipping down before I could stop them. She said nothing more, just placed her hand on my shoulder. Warm, grounding, real. That night I slept without fear for the first time since the storm. Days turned to weeks. My body grew stronger, my heart slower to race at every sound. She told me her name, Ama Zuri, a healer once known across many villages, until fear and jealousy drove her into exile. People called her Forest Witch, long before they ever called me the same. It was here, in her solitude, that she learned to heal with what others feared. The unseen power in roots, in leaves, in earth itself. Under her watch, I learned the difference between leaves that soothed and those that killed, how to boil bark into medicine, how to listen to the rhythm of pain before touching it. "The forest speaks," she told me one night as we gathered herbs by moonlight. Most people never learn to listen because they're too busy praying to what they fear. I listened, and slowly, I began to hear it, the quiet music in the wind, the heartbeat of life beneath decay. What they had called witchcraft was only knowledge too wild for their faith. Every new thing I learned felt like reclaiming a part of myself they had tried to burn. But Ama Zuri was not just teaching me to heal bodies. She was teaching me to survive the cruelty of memory. "The world will always fear what it doesn't understand," she said once, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Your task is not to fight their fear. It's to prove you were never what they named you." One evening, as the sun bled into the trees, I sat grinding roots beside the fire. The air was thick with smoke and silence. Ama Zuri watched me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, so softly, I almost missed it. "You are not cursed, child," she said, her voice trembling between prophecy and truth. "You were born to heal those who fear you." The pestle slipped from my hand, the paste spilling across the ground like blood. And in that moment I realized the forest hadn't saved me to hide me. It kept me alive to send me back. The same hands they feared began to bring life. The same voice they silenced now called back the breath of others. The forest that once swallowed my screams now carried the sound of healing. Under Ama Zuri's care, time flowed differently. Days stretched into lessons, nights whispered stories older than the stars. She taught me that the earth never stops speaking, only people forget how to listen. Each leaf, each root, each drop of rain carried a cure for something, if only you had the patience to see it. I learned by touch, by scent, by failure, and by faith. My trembling fingers became sure, my fear melted into rhythm. Soon people began to find their way to us. Some came limping from the road, others carrying sick children or wounds the world had already given up on. They came whispering, "Witch," but they left saying, "Healer." I watched them walk away, healed, and each time it felt like my heart stitched itself together, one thread at a time. One evening, when I asked Ama Zuri why she never left the forest, she smiled sadly. "Because the world doesn't know how to forgive what it fears," she said. Then, after a pause, "But you still have time to teach it." Her words stayed with me, wrapping around my thoughts like smoke. I began to dream beyond the trees, of cities I had never seen, of hospitals where knowledge lived freely, of lives I could save. Yet even in those dreams, I saw her shadow watching me, patient and proud. Then came the night the forest went still. No wind, no song, no light except for the trembling fire between us. Ama Zuri's hands were weaker, her breath shorter. Still, she tried to teach me one last thing, how to mix a fever draft from bitter roots. "The hands that heal," she whispered, "must learn when to let go." Before dawn, I woke to silence, so complete it felt sacred. The fire had gone cold. Ama Zuri lay by its ashes, her face calm, her eyes closed. For a long time I couldn't move. The forest that had once terrified me now felt empty, hollow, waiting for me to listen one last time. When I finally found the courage to touch her hand, I felt something beneath it, a small leather pouch. Inside were silver coins and a folded piece of paper, the ink fading, but the words eternal. "Go where knowledge breathes," it said. "Become what I couldn't." My tears fell onto the page, smudging her final gift. Outside, the forest mist curled around my feet like a goodbye. And as I stepped into the dawn, barefoot and trembling, I understood. The fire beneath my hands wasn't meant to stay hidden. It was meant to light the world. When I walked out of that forest, the world didn't see a survivor. It saw a ghost. My feet still carried the mud of exile, and my hands, the scent of herbs that once gave life to the dying. Every whisper of wind behind me sounded like a voice calling me cursed, but ahead, the air tasted new, sharp, hot, and alive. That was the smell of freedom, and I swore to breathe it no matter how much it burned. The forest had been my home, my prison, and my teacher. Now, as I stepped beyond its tangled edge, every root seemed to grab at my ankles like it couldn't bear to let me go. Ama Zuri's pouch hung from my neck. Inside, her herbs, her coins, and the final note that had rewritten my destiny. "Go where knowledge breathes." Her voice haunted me with every step, not in sorrow, but in strength. The path stretched endlessly, a red river of dust and heat winding between sleeping hills. My bare feet sank into it, leaving prints that looked more like scars than steps. When the first village came into view, my heart faltered. The sound of hammers, goats bleating, women grinding maize, all so normal, so painfully human. I wanted to walk straight through, to be invisible, but that was impossible. Heads turned, conversations stopped, eyes followed. "Isn't that the witch's child?" someone whispered. "Didn't she die in the storm?" Another voice hissed, "Keep your children away." The words clung to me like smoke. I kept walking, my face calm, even as shame pressed like stone against my ribs. They had once been my people, but to them, I would always be the girl who carried death. When the last hut faded behind me, I exhaled. The wind that met me then was softer, carrying the scent of earth after rain. The road ahead shimmered in the afternoon sun, long and merciless. I didn't know where it led, but anything beyond fear was worth the journey. Hunger became my shadow, thirst my companion. Days melted into nights beneath a bruised sky. Sometimes I slept by the roadside, the stars watching like old gods. Sometimes I whispered to Ama Zuri, asking if she could still see me from wherever spirits rest. The silence that answered was kind, as if the world itself was listening. On the fifth morning, when my strength was nearly gone, I saw the city, Lagos, sprawling like a living creature across the horizon. Towers glinted like mirrors, cars groaned like thunder, and a sea of voices rose in constant motion. The air was thick with smoke, oil, sweat, and something that made my heart race, the faint clean bite of antiseptic. I followed that smell like a promise, weaving through crowds until I found it. A small clinic tucked between a shop and a church. The walls were cracked, the paint chipped, but through the open door I saw white coats moving, people who healed, not feared. I stood outside until a nurse noticed me. "Yes?" she barked. "What do you want?" "I can clean," I said softly. "Sweep, wash, anything." Her eyes lingered on my dirty feet, the pouch around my neck, the hollowness in my face. For a moment, pity softened her tone. "We pay little," she said finally. "You'll sleep behind the building." That night, I lay beside the clinic wall, the hum of city life wrapping around me like a lullaby. The smell of disinfectant drifted through the air, sharp, sterile, and beautiful. It smelled like hope disguised as hardship. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of running. I dreamed of learning. Days turned into weeks. I worked from dawn till night, scrubbing floors until my hands cracked and bled. I emptied trash bins heavy with sickness, washed linens stained with pain, carried buckets of water until my shoulders screamed. But as I cleaned, I watched. Every move the doctors made, every word they spoke, I memorized them all. They didn't know it, but I was studying. Their tools, their medicines, their language. Each day was a classroom disguised as labor. When the others rested, I gathered scraps, torn prescription pads, old anatomy charts, anything with drawings. At night, under a flickering bulb, I copied the sketches by hand, tracing veins and bones until my fingers trembled. My broom had become my scalpel, the floor my textbook. The other workers laughed when they saw me drawing, but I didn't stop. I wasn't cleaning floors anymore. I was clearing a path. One evening, the clinic grew quiet. Stayed behind, lost in another drawing, a pair of lungs drawn on a scrap of paper, each line exact and trembling. A soft sound made me turn. A man stood in the doorway, tall, tired, kind-eyed, one of the doctors. He picked up the paper gently. "You drew this?" he asked. I nodded. Words caught in my throat. He studied it for a long moment, then looked at me. Not through me, but into me. "You have the eyes of a healer," he said quietly. The world seemed to hold its breath. His words struck something buried deep within me. A door long shut, now trembling open. No one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever seen me as more than a curse. The broom slipped from my hand, clattering against the tiles. In that sound, I heard something break, not inside me, but around me. And I knew, as the doctor walked away, that the road I had feared was no longer carrying me away from death. It was leading me toward destiny. I couldn't read the words, but I could feel what they meant. Each line breathed like something alive, whispering of a world where knowledge wasn't forbidden and healing wasn't sin. The pages smelled of dust and medicine, and as my fingers brushed across the ink, I felt as if I was touching a door to a future that dared to include me. After that night in the storeroom, everything changed between Dr. Bayo and me. He didn't speak of what he had seen, the drawings, the hunger in my eyes. But the next evening, when I entered the clinic, a small old book waited for me on the shelf where I kept my broom. Its cover was torn, its edges frayed, but the title, barely visible under layers of fingerprints, said, "Basic Anatomy for Beginners." My heart stuttered. I opened it, and though the words were strangers, the pictures felt like home. Every muscle, every bone, every vein, they spoke in a language my hands already knew. Dr. Bayo began teaching me secretly. After closing hours, when the nurses had gone and the lights dimmed, he would sit with me in the small storage room. We whispered lessons like secrets, tracing letters with the tips of our fingers, sounding out words that tasted strange but beautiful on my tongue. I stumbled over them, embarrassed, but he never laughed. "Medicine isn't about big words," he said once. "It's about big hearts." Each night, after cleaning the floors and emptying the waste bins, I stayed longer, learning how to read patient charts, memorizing Latin terms, and copying diagrams into my notebook. Sleep became a luxury I didn't crave anymore. The hunger I had once known for food had turned into something else, a hunger for knowledge that filled my stomach, my lungs, my veins. Sometimes, when I finally looked up from my notes, dawn would already be breaking, its light cutting through the slats of the storeroom window, like gold veins across the dark. The clinic became my school. I learned how to identify fevers by the eyes, how to steady a pulse, how to mix herbs with modern drugs when medicine ran short. Dr. Bayo guided me gently, testing my memory, pushing my courage. Once he caught me treating a cut on a patient's arm when no one was watching. I thought he'd scold me, but he only smiled. "Healing is already in your hands," he said. "All that's left is to give it a name." Weeks turned into months. My confidence grew, but so did my fear. fear that the world would never let someone like me become what I was meant to be. The whispers of which still followed me in dreams, echoing through every success. Yet every time I opened that book, the voices quieted. Each new word I learned was a small act of rebellion against my past. One morning, after another long night of study, I found Dr. Bio waiting at my desk. He wasn't smiling this time. Instead, he held a crisp white sheet of paper, official-looking, with stamps and symbols I couldn't yet read. He placed it gently before me, his eyes warm but serious. "You've done enough learning in the shadows," he said. I looked down, my hands trembling. Across the top of the page, bold letters spelled something I couldn't yet pronounce. "It's an application," he explained softly, "for a medical scholarship. A real one." My throat tightened. "For me," I whispered, the words barely finding air. He nodded. "You're ready, Amina." And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I realized that the same world that once silenced me was now daring me to speak. And my voice had finally found its name. Dreams are heavier when you carry them barefoot. They don't float. They drag, scraping your heart across every stone of doubt, until you bleed belief. I thought leaving the forest had freed me, but I soon learned that the city had its own kind of wilderness, one where kindness hid behind glass doors and cruelty wore perfume. The first day I walked into the community college, my heart beat like it was trying to escape my chest. I wore a borrowed skirt, a blouse one size too big, and shoes that pinched my toes with every step. The other students were younger, sharper, and cleaner. They smelled of books, not bleach, of opportunity, not sweat. When I entered the lecture hall, every head turned. I felt their stares before I heard their laughter. Soft, polished, poisonous. "Who's the cleaner?" someone whispered. "Maybe she's lost." Another voice chuckled. "No, she's the witch's daughter." The words slid through the air like blades. I smiled faintly, not out of confidence, but to hide the sting. By day, I cleaned floors at the clinic. By night, I cleaned my fear off the pages of borrowed textbooks. Dr. Bayo had helped me enroll through the scholarship, but he couldn't shield me from the weight of the world's disbelief. I studied in the back of classrooms, my notebook always damp with sweat from scrubbing tiles. My accent made words stumble. My hands shook when asked to answer questions, yet every failure became fuel. I remembered Ama Zuri's hands, cracked, gentle, certain, and I kept going. There were days the hunger came back, fierce and familiar. I skipped meals to afford transport to class, washed my clothes at midnight behind the clinic, and whispered anatomy terms under my breath as I mopped the corridors. Sometimes I fell asleep, sitting upright against the storeroom wall. Dreams filled with diagrams and faces of patients I longed to help. When exhaustion clawed at my resolve, I repeated Ama Zuri's last words like prayer. "You are not cursed, child. You were born to heal those who fear you." Slowly, I began to understand the language of science, the rhythm of cells, the poetry of the human body. The same hands that once touched herbs now traced arteries and nerves on paper, and each discovery felt like forgiveness. Some professors noticed my determination. One of them, an older woman named Dr. Nena, began letting me assist with demonstrations. "You learn by doing," she told me. Her belief in me became a quiet anchor amid the noise of mockery. But cruelty has a long memory. It hides in whispers that crawl through the walls when you least expect them. One evening, after a long shift at the clinic, I was scrubbing the last stains from the ward floor. My back ached, my mind weary, but I hummed softly to stay awake. The nurses at the far end of the corridor didn't know I was still there. Their voices floated through the stillness like smoke. "Isn't that her?" one murmured. "The girl who cursed her mother. The witch child." A pause. Then quiet laughter. Quick, nervous, cruel. My hands froze mid-air, the mop slipping from my grasp. The word witch echoed down the corridor, bouncing off walls I thought I had built strong enough to protect me. The smell of antiseptic turned sour in my throat, memories flooding back, torches, screams, rain. And as I stood there trembling, I realized the past I had run from had finally found its way into the place I had begun to call home. Sometimes, to heal the world, you must first rename your pain. The name Amina carried too many ghosts, whispers of curses, ashes of fear, and memories that bled no matter how tightly I wrapped them. I wanted to keep living, but each time I heard my name, it pulled me back into that storm, that night, that fire of judgment. To step into my future, I had to bury the name that tied me to the past. For weeks after the nurse's whispers, I walked through the clinic like a ghost. I cleaned in silence, studied in silence, even dreamed in silence. Every time someone laughed behind me, I flinched, certain they were laughing at the witch who dared to chase knowledge. But pain, I learned, is a stubborn teacher. It doesn't leave you broken, it leaves you burning. And that fire inside me began to whisper something new. They don't get to name you anymore. That night, I opened Ama Zuri's old pouch and laid its contents on the small wooden table, dried herbs, the faded note, and the last of her coins. The air smelled faintly of forest rain. I closed my eyes and saw her face, wrinkled, patient, full of unspoken faith. She had called me child, never witch. She had called me healer, never curse. And I knew then what I needed to do. If the world would not see me as Amina, the accused, it would see me as someone reborn, someone whose name carried purpose, not pain. The next morning, I walked to a small registration office downtown. The clerk looked up lazily as I handed him my forms. "New ID?" he asked. I nodded. My hand trembled as I wrote the letters carefully, deliberately, as though etching a spell that could rewrite destiny. Dr. Ama Zuri. Ama. For mercy, the part of my spirit that refused to die. Zuri. For the woman who had taught me that healing was the only true power worth having. When the new name printed on the paper, I stared at it until my vision blurred. It wasn't just ink. It was absolution. The girl called Witch had vanished into dust, and from that dust, a healer was born. The world around me began to shift in quiet ways. Professors who had once overlooked me now lingered longer by my desk. My voice steadied when I spoke in class. Dr. Bayo smiled differently too, not with pity, but with pride. He began to tell others about my progress, calling me doctor, even before the title was mine. His faith was the bridge I walked across toward belief in myself. One afternoon, he entered the storeroom holding a letter. Thick paper, sealed with a crest I didn't recognize. "It's from the World Medical Fellowship," he said, his eyes bright. "They're offering a full scholarship for women in medicine. I think you should apply." I stared at the envelope, my pulse hammering in my throat. "Me," I whispered. "I'm not ready." He smiled softly. "Ama Zuri is." That night I filled the form beneath the flickering bulb. Every word I wrote felt like a prayer stitched into paper, a confession of who I had been and who I wanted to become. I told them about the forest, the fever, the healer who taught me that science and spirit were never enemies. I told them I didn't want to wear a white coat for fame or wealth. I wanted to wear it to rewrite what the word witch meant. Weeks passed. I stopped hoping. Then, one morning, as I arrived at the clinic, I found an envelope pinned to the door with my name, Dr. Ama Zuri. My fingers shook as I tore it open. Inside, gold letters shimmered under the morning sun. "Congratulations. You have been selected for the International Medical Scholarship, Geneva." I sank to the ground, the dust cool beneath my knees. The city around me blurred into color and sound, traffic, voices, laughter. But inside me, there was only stillness. I thought of Ama Zuri's forest, the way light filtered through her leaves, like soft forgiveness. I thought of the villagers who had thrown stones at me, and of how those stones had unknowingly built my strength. The day of my departure came like a heartbeat, sudden, unstoppable. As the plane rose above the clouds, I pressed my palm to the window, watching the land grow smaller until it became a patchwork of earth and memory. The wind outside howled like a voice from the past, calling my old name one last time. I smiled through tears, whispering into the endless sky. One day, I'll return, not to curse them, but to cure them. The engines roared louder, and the world below disappeared, but in my chest, the forest still breathed, alive, waiting for my return. In that foreign city, no one called me a witch. They called me brilliant, but brilliance has its own loneliness. It shines so brightly that sometimes you can't see who you are beneath it. I arrived with a borrowed name, a heavy heart, and the ghosts of a past that refused to stay buried. Yet for the first time, my steps didn't echo with fear. They echoed with purpose. Geneva was colder than anything I had ever known, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The air tasted clean, too clean, as if it had never known dust, or the scent of burning herbs, or the smoke of home fires. The streets gleamed with precision, every building standing tall and deliberate, every person moving with the assurance of belonging. And there I was, the girl who once slept under trees and learned medicine from leaves, standing at the gates of a university, where the walls whispered in Latin, and the corridors smelled of ambition. The first weeks were brutal. My accent tangled around every English and French word. My clothes looked different. My skin carried stories that the others didn't know how to read. The professors spoke fast, their words sharp as scalpels. I wrote until my hands cramped, studied until my eyes burned, and still, I felt behind. When the others went to cafes and laughed over coffee, I stayed behind in the library, chasing meanings I didn't yet understand. But knowledge, like healing, has always recognized hunger, and I was starving for it. I read every book that touched the human body, traced diagrams until my fingers memorized every nerve, every vessel. The library became my new forest, silent, vast, and full of secrets waiting to be found. Slowly, the language of medicine began to make sense, and for the first time, I felt the same power I had once felt in Ama Zuri's hut, the power to turn pain into understanding. My professors noticed. They saw the precision in my drawings, the steadiness of my hand during lab dissections, the questions I asked that came from somewhere beyond the textbook. "You think differently, Ama," one of them told me after a class. "You see connections the rest of us miss." I smiled, but inside I wanted to tell him the truth, that my knowledge didn't start in a lab. It started in a forest where healing was whispered to the leaves and pain was treated with compassion, not credentials. Yet, even with recognition, loneliness lingered. At night, when snow blanketed the city, I would press my face to the window, watching the flakes fall silently, and wonder if the same sky stretched over my village. I missed the smell of rain on red soil, the songs of night birds, the pulse of life that hummed even through suffering. But I carried those memories like medicine, small doses of warmth that kept me human in a world made of marble and light. Years passed. I learned, I worked, I grew. I blended the science they taught me with the spirit I had carried all along. Where others saw equations, I saw stories. Where they saw patients, I saw souls. My methods were unusual, but they worked. My professors began inviting me to assist in clinics, to observe surgeries, to speak on panels. Each opportunity felt like another stone placed on the path back to the girl I used to be, the one who had once been too afraid to touch the wounded. When graduation came, the air itself felt holy. I stood among hundreds of students dressed in white coats that shimmered under the golden lights of the hall. The same hands that once trembled under accusation now held the certificate that declared me a doctor. Dr. Ama Zuri, healer, scholar, survivor. I closed my eyes as they called my name, and for a moment I heard Ama Zuri's laughter in the wind. I imagined her standing in the back of the hall, her eyes proud, her voice whispering, "You see, child, you were never cursed, only chosen." As the applause faded, the dean approached, shaking my hand warmly. I smiled, tears welling, my heart finally feeling weightless after years of carrying shame. But then, as I stepped down from the stage, an attendant stopped me and handed me a letter, thick, sealed with red wax, my name written in hurried strokes. My stomach tightened. No one here knew how to reach me, and yet this letter had found me. I broke the seal carefully, and before I could unfold it, the faint scent of smoke and earth rose from the paper, a scent I hadn't breathed in years. The first words blurred before my eyes. Outbreak spreading fast. Many are dying. We need help. Your village. My breath hitched, the world spinning around me. The applause still echoed, but its joy had vanished. I clutched the letter to my chest, my white coat glowing under the lights, and whispered, "It's time." For the first time in years, the witch and the doctor were no longer enemies. They were one. They said the witch was returning, and this time, she came with medicine. The news spread faster than the sickness itself, carried by wind and whispers. Some said I was coming to finish what I started. Others said I had returned to lift the curse I once brought. None of them knew the truth. I wasn't coming to take lives. I was coming to fight for them. The flight back to my homeland felt longer than all the years I had spent abroad. Every cloud I crossed carried echoes of a world I had once fled. The forest, the torches, the night they called me evil. My hands, once tied in fear, now rested on crates of medical supplies marked with the Red Cross. The air inside the plane smelled faintly of antiseptic and hope. Around me sat volunteers, young doctors and nurses from different parts of the world, none of whom knew the full story of the woman they followed. To them, I was Dr. Ama Zuri, the award-winning physician returning to lead a mission against an epidemic. But beneath that name, the girl called Amina the Witch still breathed quietly, waiting to see if home would remember or forgive. When we landed, the air hit me like memory, thick with dust, heat, and history. The village had changed, but not enough. The market stalls still leaned on each other like weary bones. The same clay huts dotted the horizon. Only now the air carried a new sound, coughing. It came from every corner, deep and ragged, the kind that steals breath and leaves silence in its place. We drove through the center of the village in an old truck painted white with red letters. Children ran at first, then stopped when they saw me step out. Their laughter died mid-air. The elders standing by the well froze, eyes wide. One of them whispered something, and within seconds, the word spread like fire through dry grass. The witch has returned. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. The memory of that night, of hands dragging me, of screams calling for my death, flashed like lightning behind my eyes. Yet I stood tall, my white coat gleaming in the sunlight. The volunteers began unloading boxes, setting up tents, unpacking medicine. But the villagers stayed back, watching with wary eyes. Mothers pulled their children closer, men muttered under their breath, and no one came near. I knew this kind of fear. It had once been my prison, but now it had to become my bridge. I stepped forward slowly, raising my hands. "I am not here to harm you," I said, my voice steady though my heart trembled. "I am here to heal." An old man spat on the ground. "Last time you were here, our crops died. Our women fell ill. You cursed this place." I met his gaze without anger. "No," I said quietly. "I was a child you cursed because you were afraid of what you didn't understand." Silence fell. The wind itself seemed to pause. And then, somewhere in the distance, a woman screamed. We ran toward the sound, through narrow paths lined with frightened faces, until we reached a small hut. Inside, a little boy lay on the floor, his skin burning, his breath shallow, eyes rolled back. His mother knelt beside him, sobbing, clutching his limp hand. The crowd outside pressed closer, whispering prayers, fears, suspicions. Someone murmured, "She brought this sickness with her." Another added, "It's her punishment returning to us." I ignored them all. Kneeling beside the child, I placed my palm gently against his chest. His heartbeat fluttered weakly under my hand. Too fast, too fragile. The smell of sickness filled the air. Sour, metallic, familiar. Familiar. The realization hit me like cold water. The heat on his skin, the tightness in his chest, the rash forming across his neck. I had seen it before. Years ago. On the same floor. On the same kind of night. My mother. The sickness that took her. The one they had blamed on witchcraft. It was back. Not a curse, but a virus. Not magic, but ignorance. And this time, I had come armed with the truth. "Prepare a cot," I said sharply to the volunteers. "Boil water, disinfect the instruments, and bring the IV bag." The mother stared at me through tears. "Can you save him?" she whispered, her voice trembling between hope and disbelief. I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw every woman who had once turned away from me, every hand that had thrown stones, every voice that had cursed my name. But I also saw what fear had stolen from them. Mercy. "I will try," I said softly. That's all healing ever is. Trying, even when the world doesn't believe in you. We worked quickly, my mind steady, though my heart raced. The villagers stood outside, watching through the open door, torn between superstition and desperation. I cleaned his wounds, stabilized his fever, and prayed silently that science would succeed where faith once failed. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, the boy's breathing grew shallow again. I held him close, feeling the heat of his skin against mine. His mother cried softly, clutching my sleeve, "Please save him. Please." I looked down. The same rash, the same fever, the same helpless rhythm. My mother's death replayed before me, line by line. I whispered a prayer I hadn't spoken since the night they cast me out. Not again. And as the child's small body trembled in my arms, I realized the past I had come to heal had returned, asking if I was truly ready to forgive it. Healing them hurt more than their hatred ever did. Every wound I closed reopened an old scar inside me, and every life I saved whispered a question I wasn't ready to answer. Can you truly forgive those who tried to destroy you? I had come home to cure their bodies, but I hadn't expected to bleed from my soul in the process. The outbreak spread faster than fear itself. Within days, half the village was coughing blood, and the air reeked of fever and smoke. My small medical camp overflowed with the sick, mothers shaking with chills, children burning under blankets, old men gasping between prayers. The volunteers worked tirelessly beside me, but the supplies were running low, and sleep had become a luxury none of us could afford. Still, I refused to stop. I owed that to the child who had died in my arms, and to the mother I could never save. At dawn, I began tracing the infection, visiting each hut, noting symptoms, searching for a pattern. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. The sickness wasn't witchcraft, wasn't punishment. It was the water. The river that snaked through the village, once the lifeblood of generations, had turned foul and dark. Dead animals floated at its edges, and children still fetched buckets from its banks. I knelt beside it, the stench of decay rising around me, and felt rage burn behind my ribs. This river had not cursed them. They had poisoned themselves through ignorance. I gathered the elders that evening. The same men who once had raised torches now sat before me, pale and trembling. "Your water is killing you," I said quietly. "You must stop drinking from it immediately." One of them, old and thin, shook his head. "That river has fed us for centuries," he said. "We cannot live without it." I looked at him, exhaustion making my voice colder than I intended. Then you will die with it. We boiled water, distributed purification tablets, and taught them how to collect rainwater safely. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The fevers broke, the rashes faded. Laughter, weak but real, began to return to the huts. For the first time, the villagers approached me without fear. Some bowed their heads when I passed. Others left small gifts of fruit and herbs outside the clinic tent. It was not apology, not yet. But it was a beginning. But healing takes more than medicine. It takes endurance, and mine was running out. My hands blistered from hours of mixing salves, my throat burned from shouting instructions, and my body ached with fever I refused to acknowledge. Each night I lay awake, listening to the distant cries of the sick, forcing myself to rise again before dawn. I told myself I could rest when it was over, but the truth was, I feared rest, because rest meant remembering. On the 7th day, as the sun bled into the horizon, a messenger came running into the camp, breathless. "Doctor," he gasped. "The chief, he is dying." For a moment I couldn't move. His name struck me like lightning. The man who had led the mob, who had called for my burning, who had spat at my mother's grave. I remembered his face twisted in hatred, his voice shouting, "She's cursed. Cast her out before she brings death to us all." And now, death had come for him, not through curse or fire, but through the same sickness that had taken so many. The volunteers looked at me, waiting. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every part of me wanted to walk away, to let time finish what he had begun. But somewhere beneath the fury, Ama Zuri's voice echoed like wind through the trees. "You were born to heal those who fear you." So I went. He lay in his hut, drenched in sweat, his breath shallow, his lips cracked. His eyes fluttered open when I knelt beside him. For a moment confusion clouded his face, then recognition. "You," he rasped, voice weak but laced with shame. "You're still alive." I nodded. Because mercy kept me alive. I opened my medical bag, my hands trembling not from fear but from the weight of choice. The villagers gathered outside, silent, watching through the doorway. "Will you help me?" he whispered. "After everything I did." I met his gaze, the same eyes that once looked at me with hatred. "Yes," I said softly, steadying the needle in my hand. "Because forgiveness heals what medicine can't." Hours passed, the fever refusing to break. Sweat drenched my brow, the candle flickering as I worked. I could feel my strength slipping, but I kept going, stitch by stitch, breath by breath. Outside, the village prayed, their voices trembling through the night. And as the chief's pulse weakened under my fingers, I realized that saving him wasn't just about redemption. It was about rewriting the ending they had written for me long ago. But the question lingered in my chest like fire. If I save him, will the pain finally die? Or will it begin again? Sometimes mercy heals deeper than medicine. I thought curing their bodies would be enough. But standing beside the man who once wanted me dead, I learned that forgiveness is the truest form of healing. It doesn't erase the pain, it transforms it. And sometimes, that transformation burns brighter than any revenge ever could. The chief's breathing was shallow, his chest rising in uneven waves as I sat beside him through the long night. The fever had broken in others, but not in him. It clung to him like the guilt he refused to speak. The candlelight flickered across his face, deepening the hollows in his cheeks, the shadows under his eyes. His skin was clammy, his body frail. A man who had once commanded fear, now trembling under the weight of his own mortality. I had been awake for 3 nights straight. My hands were raw from washing wounds, my throat dry from speaking comfort into hopeless air. Still I refused to leave. I mixed herbs with saline, cooled his forehead with damp cloths, whispered prayers under my breath that I hadn't spoken since childhood. Outside, the villagers kept vigil, whispering through the darkness. I could feel their eyes through the open doorway, the same eyes that had watched me burn in rumor years ago. At dawn, the light crept through the cracks of the hut, soft and golden, touching the walls, like forgiveness made visible. The chief stirred, his lips parting in a rasped breath. I leaned forward, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then wide with disbelief. "You," he croaked, his voice a broken whisper. "You're still here?" I nodded, exhaustion heavy in my bones. "Yes," I said softly. I stayed. He stared at me for a long moment, tears filling his eyes. "Why?" His voice cracked. "After what I did, after what we all did." I met his gaze. "Because hate doesn't cure sickness," I whispered. "And vengeance never healed anyone." He tried to sit up, his hands trembling. "I don't deserve your mercy," he said, his voice shaking. "I called you a demon. I burned your name." His words faltered as tears rolled freely down his cheeks. "I killed your peace." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick, heavy, sacred. Then, slowly, I reached for his hand. It was rough, cold, trembling beneath my touch. "Then let this be your penance," I said quietly. "Live, live, and teach them what fear destroyed." The door creaked open behind us, and sunlight spilled into the room. The villagers stood gathered outside, their faces pale with awe. When they saw him awake, a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Disbelief, relief, tears. The chief turned toward them, his voice barely a whisper but filled with something stronger than pride. "She saved me," he said hoarsely. "The witch saved me." His words shattered something ancient in that village, the curse of ignorance, the shadow of fear. He tried to stand, but stumbled, his strength gone. I moved to steady him, but he shook his head and dropped to his knees instead. Right there, in the dust between us. The man who once condemned me now knelt before me, his tears falling freely onto the earth. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive us all." Gasps broke through the crowd. Some of the elders bowed their heads. Mothers clutched their children closer. And then, slowly, one by one, the villagers followed the chief's lead, bending their knees, heads lowered, the sound of weeping spreading like rain after drought. My chest tightened as I looked around, at the faces that had once spat my name, now wet with remorse. At that moment, I realized that forgiveness wasn't something you gave for others to feel better. It was something you gave to free yourself. The chains that had held me since childhood, the fear, the resentment, the anger, all began to fall away, like dust in sunlight. I knelt too, not out of submission, but gratitude. "Get up," I said softly, tears slipping down my cheeks. "There's nothing left to forgive. We were all sick, not with curses, but with blindness. And now, we see." The crowd rose, their tears turning into quiet applause, their eyes filled with reverence. Someone whispered, "Doctor of Mercy," and the name caught like fire through the crowd. Doctor of Mercy. It wasn't a title I sought, but somehow it felt like the one I had always been born for. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned gold, I stood at the edge of the village, the river glistening nearby. Clean now, alive again. Children laughed as they fetched water, their joy carrying into the trees. I felt the wind shift, gentle and familiar. It brushed against my face, carrying a voice I had not heard in years, soft, wise, full of love. "Now they see," Ama Zuri whispered through the rustling leaves, "that the fire was never witchcraft." I closed my eyes, tears tracing my smile. The air shimmered with warmth that felt almost like a blessing. "It was light," her voice said. And as the wind wrapped around me like an embrace, I realized I hadn't come home to reclaim my past. I had come to fulfill its promise. Once they burned my name in fear, now they carve it in gratitude. There was a time my footsteps were curses whispered through clenched teeth, a time my shadow was enough to empty a room. But now, when I walk through the same streets, the air hums with blessings. The people who once condemned me now call me healer, and the village that cast me out has become my home. Months passed since the fever faded. The land had healed, and so it seemed had the people. The river ran clear again, the markets buzzed with laughter, and the songs of children filled the mornings. But deep in my heart, I knew true healing was more than survival. It was transformation. Fear could return if ignorance stayed. So I began to build something that would outlive both. A sanctuary of learning, born from pain, built on mercy. At the edge of the village, on the land where wildflowers had begun to bloom, we raised walls from clay and faith. Brick by brick, the villagers worked beside me. The same hands that had once thrown stones now carried water, mixed mud, and laid foundations. I watched as their labor turned into penance, their sweat into redemption. When the first roof beam went up, the people cheered. And when we painted the sign, Zuri Medical Center, tears blurred my vision. I could almost feel Ama Zuri's smile in the wind. The small hospital grew into a symbol of rebirth. It had no marble floors or shining lights, but it had warmth. It had a purpose. Its walls were lined with herbs on one side and medical charts on the other. Science and tradition, hand in hand, just as Ama Zuri had taught me. We treated everyone, from farmers bitten by snakes to mothers in labor, to elders weakened by years of hardship. But the greatest miracle wasn't the medicine. It was the trust that returned, one heartbeat at a time. Every afternoon, I gathered the young girls beneath the mango tree by the hospital's gate. Some came barefoot, others clutching notebooks made from scrap paper. Their eyes were bright with curiosity, the same spark I had once hidden under fear. I taught them how to listen to a heartbeat, how to mix herbs for fever, how to write their names proudly. Because knowledge, I told them, was the truest form of freedom. When they called me Mama Doctor, I laughed softly, remembering when that same title had been an insult dressed as superstition. But I wasn't alone on this journey. The villagers who once whispered my name like poison now worked beside me with humility. The chief, frail but alive, donated land for a new ward. The women formed a group to teach hygiene and water purification to neighboring villages. And one morning, as the sun rose golden over the fields, I saw something that made my heart swell. A young boy, playing by the river, his laughter pure and free. The same boy whose fever had almost taken him now chased butterflies along the banks that once carried death. Still some nights, I sat outside the clinic and stared at the forest's edge, the place where my story had once ended and begun. The memories of that storm, the torches, the screams, all lived quietly inside me. But they no longer haunted me. They guided me. I realized that the world had not been wrong to fear what it didn't understand. It had simply needed time to learn. And perhaps I had needed time to forgive. On the anniversary of the hospital's opening, the village gathered once again in the square. Drums beat softly, laughter floated through the air, and the chief, his voice trembling with emotion, stood before the crowd. Once, he said, we called her witch. Now we call her a miracle. The crowd cheered, and as I looked around at their smiling faces, I saw not guilt, but gratitude. They handed me a carved wooden plaque, the edges engraved with intricate symbols. My name shone at the center, Dr. Ama Zuri, the healer of light. I traced the letters with my fingertips, feeling the weight of every tear, every scar, every step that had brought me here. The same fire that once hunted me now lights their homes. The same hands they called cursed now cradle their children. The same whispers that once spoke my doom now sing my praise. And sometimes, when the night grows quiet and the stars lean close, I remember the girl they cast into the dark, because sometimes the witch they feared becomes the miracle they pray for. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Leave a comment below and tell me what forgiveness means to you. Your one like, one share, could inspire someone fighting their own battles with pain and purpose. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you never miss another story that reminds us light can rise even from the darkest names. Because sometimes, the stories we heal through are the ones that heal us back.